Hello everybody, it's Chris Clark with discgolf.law. Many of you have heard by now, I'm sure, the news from earlier this week that the Disc Golf Pro Tour has acquired Jomez Productions. That is something that we've been expecting to happen now for a while. If you've been watching our prior videos, you know that we've been talking a lot about this consolidation phase that we perceive the disc golf industry to be in right now. And I think this is another perfect and wonderful and exciting example of what that means. Jomez is an iconic brand in disc golf and one of the greatest success stories of the past 5 or 6 years. Incredibly popular YouTube channel. They have some of the most successful and skilled commentators and broadcasters on their team. They had a huge financial success period during the COVID pandemic when lots of disc golf companies, particularly manufacturers, they just couldn't make product fast enough to meet consumer demand. Jomez has had a great run, a very successful run, but there's been no secret that in 2022 and into 2023, Jomez has been experiencing some financial difficulties. We can trace it back in part to the deal that Jomez struck with the Disc Golf Pro Tour last year in 2022 when they agreed to pay $500,000 in exchange for 2 years of exclusive rights to produce first round coverage for both the MPO and FPO division. At the time, I imagine it looked like a good, attractive deal for Jomez, and they imagined that the revenue that could be derived from this fee that they were paying to the Disc Golf Pro Tour would far exceed what the cost would be. But when financial difficulties come along and when you're in a cash crunch, you start trying to look for a solution. For years now, Jomez has worked closely with the Disc Golf Pro Tour. It's no surprise that discussions were had between those two parties about the future, what solutions or structures they may be able to come up with in order to maximize value for both entities going forward. Jomez, having a close working partnership with the Disc Golf Pro Tour and finding itself in a cash crunch and unable to meet its financial obligations, what is Jomez to do and what is the Disc Golf Pro Tour to do? And this is one of the things that I really love about this story because it illustrates a point that I have shared with clients and others for years now. What do we do when we're in a contract with another party and the other party breaches the contract? Perfect example, the other party is unable to pay an amount that they promised to pay under the contract. One option is you can fight. You can sue the other party for breach of contract. That usually involves some nasty letters getting sent back and forth. Maybe there's mediation or arbitration and maybe eventually ends up in litigation. It's very expensive. It's very distracting. It's a huge headache. And at the end of the day, especially for this amount of money that we're talking about, especially when Jomez likely doesn't have the ability to pay, it just ends up being an expensive nightmare for everyone. That's one option, that's one way that you can treat a breach of contract, but that's not what the Disc Golf Pro Tour and Jomez have done, and they deserve credit for this. Instead, they looked at the situation and they said, is there a possible solution here that would be a win for both parties? We don't want to take each other to court. Instead, let's sit down and let's talk about how could this look in a different structure that could be beneficial for both of these parties and beneficial for fans of disc golf media. So that is likely an oversimplified, shortened version of how the Disc Golf Pro Tour ended up acquiring Jomez Productions. I did not work on this deal, so I don't know specifics, but I can give you some just general idea of how these deals are structured based on my experience. Jomez Productions LLC is a Texas limited liability company. That is the legal entity through which Jomez operates. The Disc Golf Pro Tour also has a Texas limited liability company through which they do business. It's called LOWA, L-O-W-A, LLC. All of this information is publicly available through the Texas Secretary of State's website. And so when you have two entities like that, you can structure the deal a few different ways. One example would be whoever owns Jomez, the Disc Golf Pro Tour, compensates the owners of Jomez in exchange for these owners giving to the Disc Golf Pro Tour their ownership interest. Sometimes they call it a stock purchase. These are not corporations, these are LLCs, so we would call it an equity purchase or a unit purchase. Another possibility is they could structure it like an asset purchase, where a company comes along and they say, Jomez, we don't want to buy the company itself, but your company owns a whole bunch of assets that we really like. And assets can be physical things like cameras and vans, but it can also be intellectual property or content. In that situation, the Disc Golf Pro Tour would come along, buy the assets, kind of strip the assets out of Jomez. They could even do a deal where they agree to leave certain assets behind that they don't want. My hunch is that it is the first option. Again, that's just a complete guess. I believe that the Disc Golf Pro Tour acquired the equity of Jomez Productions. Either way, what might this mean for the future? In many cases, when we have a transaction like this, both entities continue to operate just as they did before. We are hearing that Jomez will continue to function just as it has in the past. The Pro Tour and Jomez are going to take advantage of some synergies and shared resources and some of these benefits of scale. As viewers, we shouldn't really notice a lot of difference, and Jomez is just going to keep plugging away, doing what it's been doing all along. That is one thing that often happens when one company acquires another. Another thing that happens is the acquiring company essentially shuts down the acquired company. So in this case, the Pro Tour shuts down Jomez, and Jomez essentially gets absorbed into or folded into the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Based on what I have heard and read, that is not the case here. But I'll draw an analogy to Meta. The company used to be known as Facebook. It now operates the Facebook platform, but it's also acquired other platforms like Instagram and WhatsApp. For now, Meta has chosen to let Facebook kind of be its own thing and Instagram be its own thing and WhatsApp be its own thing, even though they all are under common ownership. Or are they leaving them alone? Because if you're a user of these platforms, you may slowly but surely start to notice how these platforms can interact and coexist. There's shared functionality among all these platforms that's starting to pop up. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we start to see some of that over time with Disc Golf Network and Jomez. That remains to be seen, but at least in the short term, for now, it appears that Jomez will continue to operate as always. It probably won't surprise most of you if you've watched some of our prior videos to know that I think that this is a really great thing for disc golf. This transaction is one of many more like it that we will see in the future. Anytime there's a deal, anytime there's a transaction, there will be positives and negatives. And I'm sure we'll hear some loud voices who perceive something that has changed for the negative and attribute it to the fact that Jomez sold out to the Pro Tour. I just don't see it that way at all. This is a sign that our industry overall is healthy and it's growing and advancing the way that many other industries have in the past. I think this is something to be celebrated, and I give my congratulations to the Disc Golf Pro Tour and to Jomez as well. But I would love to know what you think. So give us a follow, like, subscribe, but most importantly, let's hear from you in the comments. I really want to know what you think of this Jomez DGPT deal.